Hello, everybody. Erin is joining us, but is having some technical difficulties, so might be a little slow to trickle in. I'm going to give y'all a couple moments to join the stream, and while we sort out some of our technical difficulties, but it's nice to see y'all. Let's see. I have a very different interface today, and I'm trying to figure out where all my usual information is, and I don't know where it is. I'm pretty sure I'm live. I hope there are people there listening. Okay. Yeah, so for those of you here, hello everyone, and thank you for coming to this month's Writing Excuses Q&A live stream. I am Dongwan. Hopefully I will be joined by my co-host Aaron in just a few minutes here. This is a monthly series where we do where two of the hosts answer questions that have been submitted by our Patreon supporters. The stream is free for everybody, but if you would like to have your question answered, go to patreon.com/writing excuses and you can submit questions for next month's Q&A. So yeah, with that, we have a few questions tonight. I'm sure everyone is jamming hard on NaNoWriMo. And we will try to answer those. And then if we have a little time at the end, I will try and pick up some extra questions from the people attending the chat and see if we can't answer those. Give me one quick second. Let me pull up the questions. There we go. All right. So this might go brisker because it's just me here, and I tend to be the fast question answer for those of you who have attended these streams before. So we'll see how quickly we get through these things. Also, we have a number of Erin-specific questions, so hopefully her computer problems get resolved and she can log in. But anyways, so the first question is coming from an unnamed question asker. How do I right now? The limiting factor is not how long I have to spend at a keyboard, but how fast I run out of ideas. I'll write for 2 hours and have to spend another 5 going out on a walk somewhere to figure out what happens next. Is there any way to make that part go faster? Um, yeah, I mean, that's a tough question, right? Where do ideas come from? That's the thing that writers get asked all the time at panels and in Q&As. And it's a little bit what this question is, right? So it sounds like your problem isn't necessarily that the hours you have available to spend, but you start writing, fill whatever content that you have for the day. You know, you write a couple scenes, you have certain ideas, those are on the page, and then you're at a point where your creative well is running low at that point and you need to replenish it. I think there's this misconception that people have is that you can quit your day job and write full time and then have all of that time where you're just going to be putting out words, writing, just writing books 7 hours a day, 8 hours a day, doing a full, regular work week of work, and then just be able to pump out n number of novels a year. There are clearly some writers who are capable of doing that. There's some people who can write an enormous amount of words, who can write 2 to 3 books a year, who can put those things together and have an endless supply of that material that goes right down on the page. There's often a trade-off in terms of that speed and sort of vaguely some complexity of the idea, right? It's hard to talk about this without it sounding like really valorizing. But they're just different categories. And if you're writing literary fiction, if you're writing something on the more literary end of the spectrum of genre fiction, it often takes a little bit more time and thought to get everything to line up in exactly the way you want, or to get the prose to be exactly where you want, right? Um, Truly, one process isn't better than the other. It's about what kind of writer you are and what you want to be doing. Now the problem is that well of creativity for most people isn't infinite, right? And even for those people who are very, very fast, there is an upper limit in there somewhere, right? At some point, they will tap out and be like, I need to take a break. I need to recharge. For some people, they can write constantly over a short burst of time or constantly for 6 months out of the year, but then we'll need to take a break for the rest of the time. And for most people, you will be able to write for a few hours a day and then need to find a way to sort of recharge that well, rebuild where you're getting your ideas from, where you are able to pull from in terms of getting words on the page. How you build that well is very different for different people. For some people, it is like what you're describing in terms of going out on a walk, being in nature, having time to like let your brain process, right? One thing I think about a lot is there is sort of, your conscious mind, your active brain, sort of, the sort of Freudian concept of having the conscious and the unconscious, right? Your conscious mind can chew on problems to a certain extent, right? That is your active, like, I'm trying to solve this, I'm actively putting things down. It also needs to be space for your unconscious to dig into those things and help solve those problems for you, right? The whole idea of sleeping on it is built around this, right? You spend a bunch of time filling that well with, or spending that time thinking about the idea, chewing on the idea. And then what you want to do is make sure you have some space and time to sit and not think about it in an active way and let your unconscious mind chew on the problem. And then it will present solutions to you. It will present, new ideas, new material, new imagery at the end of that process, right? So the classic ways of doing this are taking a break, going for a walk, taking a shower, taking a nap. For me, that is often doing what I think of as very boring, repetitive tasks. I play video games that tend to be very repetitive, something like a Diablo, where you're just doing the same thing over and over again. And that is activating my sort of like conscious mind to keep it occupied to do things and free up resources, free up processing power for my unconscious mind to start digging into things and then spitting out more creative solutions, more answers to problems, things like that, right? I apply this in all walks of my life, whether that is, solving a business problem, solving, interpersonal problem, or solving a creative problem. And I think from talking to writers over the years, this will work for them as well, right? So I talk a lot about cultivating boredom. I think we live in a world where we are very incentivized to be occupied and paying attention to things at pretty much every moment of the day. And I think that often doesn't leave space for your unconscious mind to generate the creative ideas that are going to be a big part of your process going forward, right? So I don't know how to tell you to get faster. I think maybe what I'm telling you to do instead is accept that downtime, that 5-hour walk, that playing a video game, that sitting on your couch watching a dumb TV show, whatever those things are things that are filling your creative well, that they are freeing up resources for your brain to continue to work on the book. All of those things kind of are part of your writing process. And when I've seen things really go off the rails is when I've seen people really try to let go of those things and not include them in their life, or not make enough time to have creative pursuits, to have hobbies, to have a life outside of writing. And then they tend to get stuck. They tend to get blocked on the writing process, or the quality of what they're doing drops, right? And those are hard things to talk about and hard things to find that balance. But I encourage all of you to make sure that even as you are drawing out of that creative well, even as you are doing that conscious process of putting words on page, that you are making space for your brain to rest, for your brain to get a little bored, and to let your unconscious do its job and process a bunch of stuff that your conscious mind isn't the best at solving those problems. So how do you write faster? I don't know. I've worked with a lot of writers over the course of my career, and everyone just seems to have their pace, and that pace can be different for different books. Some people can churn out a 150,000 word book in a matter of months, and some people can do a 90,000 word book in years. It depends on your process. It depends on how your brain works, what kind of fiction you're writing, who you want to be as a writer. So I don't have great answers for you here in terms of how to speed up, but I do have answers for you about how to maximize your process so that you're getting the best content out of your brain. And you are making sure that you're going to keep moving forward, right? That forward progress isn't stopping, even if it isn't going at the pace that you wish it did. So I hope that answer helps. I know it's kind of a complicated one, but okay. Next question. Well, we have multiple questions for Aaron about fellowships, and residencies that I'm not equipped to answer. So I'm going to unfortunately skip those until hopefully she can join in a minute here. Um, Seems like she is still locked out of her computer. Um, okay, so this is a long and kind of complicated question. So this listener says that they have listened to all the Writing Together episodes that we've done, and they are a cis, or he is a cis white male, and he has some concerns, right? So he recently finished his first draft, and it touches on bigotry and systemic racism, not as the main plot, but as factors of influence upon some of the characters. It's a fictional world, and I've created fictional human-like races, none of which match perfectly with the common physical or cultural traits we have come to associate with different ethnic groups in reality. As I drum my fingers, waiting to dive into revision, I've been wondering if I may still be unintentionally playing into stereotypes or other problematic areas that I don't even know exist. One solution I considered was to remove all physical descriptions, inspired by a Dan Wells comment, and one suggestion I received elsewhere was to keep physical descriptions very minimal. Trying to keep this short, I have worries about both of those approaches, but am open minded. I'm interested in any sort of litmus test to help check that I'm not playing into real stereotypes of my fictional races, but I'm actually much more interested in our opinions regarding the feasibility of not providing a reader with any physical attributes to attach real world or fictional biases. Races would still be named, and in some cases, members of those races would be identified, but physical indicators would not be. And says open to using a sensitivity reader and things like that. So, um, very complicated question. The basic, boiling this down a little bit, it sounds like this question asker has written a fantasy novel, included fantasy races in sort of a Tolkien-esque way, it sounds like. And, a lot of the origins of how we do fantasy races are racialized in a way that can cause a lot of issues for readers and sort of play into some challenging stereotypes and some hurtful stereotypes that have existed over time, right? So the question is, how do you make sure that your fantasy races aren't accidentally stepping on real world prejudices or real world issues that have come up in the past? The solution proposed is to remove all physical descriptions and or to keep those descriptions minimal. I don't love this as an answer, in part because it takes away one of your greatest tools as a writer, right? It takes away one of your abilities to paint a scene, to create a character, to give us a sense of who that person is, right? Um, I think the thing to keep in mind as you're describing people physically is that while there may be tendencies across racial groups or ethnic groups in the world that we live in, it's not consistent. You will find outliers or the variation even inside sort of the center statistical center of that group is still going to be wild and varied, right? You can describe people physically without stepping into territories where it's saying that all orcs look exactly like this. All orcs have this skin color or skin texture or this type of nose or this type of jawline, right? So I would encourage you to lean away from the broad brush and lean very, very hard into the specific brush. Almost always when it comes to these, like writing the other issues, when it comes to these issues of trying to figure out how do I present a character or fantasy element or world building element without stepping over issues of writing other cultures, writing other experiences in your fiction, especially of marginalized people, it comes down to specificity, right? If you're trying to talk very broadly about um, how one particular group lives in the world or interacts in the world, then I think that's where you get into problematic territory pretty quickly. But if you lean into the specific details of this person's face is like this, and maybe that is common among people of from where they're from, but that doesn't necessarily need to be a big part of how you talk about it. I would love for you to instead focus on the individual, and then we will start to get a picture of who this person is as we meet more people who are from this group or like this person and start to get a sense of what's the vibe, what's the aesthetic, What's the culture like? Who are these people, right? So the first step is just taking them very seriously, right? And not using that shorthand that I think somebody like Tolkien used, that unfortunately did lean very hard into some of those racial stereotypes, or that sort of D&D style of thinking about races, right? So I think having fantasy races is totally doable in a book without it ending up in this very racialized territory. I think if you want an example, take a close look at N.K. Jemisin's The Fifth Season, right? Fifth Season is in many ways a book about race. It's in many ways a book about oppression and discrimination and cycles of trauma and violence and all of these things. It's a truly incredible work. One of the things I love about it is N.K. Jemisin somehow wrote a book that speaks very immediately to the experiences of being a Black person in 21st century America, and talks a lot about issues that I think touch very closely on experiences that people have had. But no culture in her book maps to a particular group in our world. It's not like this particular group is the stand-in for, you know, white America. This particular group is the stand-in for African Americans, right? Like that is not what she's doing. What she's doing is setting up a bunch of scenarios that speak to the cycles of trauma, that speak to the experience without leaning into the racialized categories in the same way. So that's a great example of how to take this on and find ways to pull out some of that nuance without accidentally tripping over a lot of the stereotypes that make this a very difficult area to write in, and where people will, you know, get into some trouble for being a little too cavalier about these things or painting with too broad of a brush. I also really like Robert Jackson Bennett's City of Stairs. That's another series that is written by a cis white man who does, I think, a great job of representing a number of different cultures, including cultures that are very different from his own experience and his own identity as a protagonist, as a POV character. So City of Stairs is great. The Expanse is great. These are all examples that are pulling a little bit less fantasy races and more like, cultures of humans in different kind of settings, but often have an identifiable connection to a culture in our world, but sort of pushed in a way that makes it that kind of does an end run around some of the accusations of racism or appropriation that might come up in other contexts. So, complicated question, complicated answer. There's no litmus test as part of the problem. There's no way to be like, yes, this book is great. No sensitivity reader, no subject matter expert will be able to protect you entirely from that, right? The only real answers are to do the homework, make sure you know what you're talking about, make sure that you have talked to people who are coming from those experiences, and that as you're writing, you're making sure that you're treating every single character like a real person and like an individual in the world, rather than as a representative of a category or representative of a certain kind of experience, whether that's disabled or trans or queer or, Black person, Asian person, whatever it is, right? So I encourage you to think a little bit less about like, how do I make sure this is like a perfect pristine thing, and focus a little bit more on how do I make sure what's on the page is being represented well with nuance and complexity, and that I am being true and honest to an understanding of what that experience is. That's not an easy answer, certainly not a simple one, but hopefully that is at least somewhat helpful. Okay. Um, It is hard doing this solely by myself because I have to talk the whole time. I don't get a break while somebody else says something smart. I just got to keep going. Um, and we don't have a ton of questions. And again, just because it's me, this is the last question that we have from listeners, because the other ones are specifically for Aaron. So if those of you who are listening or watching, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and start preparing those and drop them in the chat, and I'll answer them after I talk about this one. Okay, so it is November. We are in NaNoWriMo. So this question is, say you succeeded at finishing the first draft of a novel during NaNoWriMo. Oh, Frabjous Day. What does the revision process look like? This can go a lot of different ways. Revision is a tricky topic, and there's a lot of different approaches from a lot of different people who all have found things that work for them. So, one thing I will say is that we are going to spend several weeks talking about revision specifically in, I believe, February. I believe February is the official NaNoWriMo revision month. So, we're going to do a little mini series around then talking about revision. That's not helpful to you now. That's not what you want to hear right now. But it does play into one thing that I want to say, which is, you know, finishing your draft as part of Nano is an absolute sprint. Going back to that first question, you have tapped your creative well very, very deeply by the time you are done with NaNoWriMo, right? You've written 50,000 words in a month, or you finished a full draft of your novel. I encourage you at that point to take a break for some period of time, to step away from your manuscript for a matter of weeks or months, to give yourself time to rest and recharge, and to get a little distance from the words on the page, right? If you go directly into revision right after you finish, you don't have the critical distance you need yet to start to really understand where the book needs work, what is working, what isn't working. Give yourself a little time to forget exactly what decisions you made and why they made them, or why you made them in particular moments, and give yourself a little bit of time to sort of recharge your brain and take a little space from the manuscript. So, take a few weeks. That's my first piece of advice. Once you do that, revision can look a few different ways. But fundamentally, what you want to do is start to identify what are the problems, what needs work, and then put together a plan of how do you want to address those. For the first step, it's basically just rereading, right? Maybe you already have notes from as you were going of like, ooh, this turn at the end of Act Two wasn't great. This character arc is not as strong as I want it to be. I know I left a hole here in the plot or where it is. And so you can start with those, but I also encourage you to go back and reread in some way. You can sit down, print it out, read the manuscript, take notes as you go. You can listen to it on audio. You can read it to yourself. All those things can be very helpful to give you a sense of what is the flow of this book? What is the overall experience of reading this book? And that can give you the stuff that's harder to pin down in terms of what needs revision rather than just this particular pin doesn't work, this turn doesn't work, this character arc doesn't work. You can instead start to look at, oh, the pace is flagging here. The story logic isn't quite landing here. This character isn't introduced in the smoothest way. Those kind of things are things you can like start to figure out at that point. Um, and so you can kind of go through and take those high level notes. And then once you have that, start to put together a plan of how do I want to approach this. Again, there's a lot of different techniques. We're going to dive a little bit deeper into them. I'm sure Mary Robinette will have a wonderful rubric and a wonderful structure for how to approach that revision. I encourage people to break things down into bite-sized chunks, right? Note cards, outlines, all of these things can be very, very helpful. Sticky notes, have some way of tracking your progress. I've seen everything from people turning pages in the manuscript once they have addressed any issues on them. So, you have a visual log of how far you're going. You can do some kind of tracker using note cards. So each beat of the story is one note card and you mark them off as you go. There's lots of different ways to approach that. So this is a very, very broad question. I've given you a very, very broad answer. But what I would say to start is to really take a step back, look at what the broad problems are, give a read through of the manuscript, give yourself some time to rest and process between those things, and then put together some kind of plan for yourself of how you would like to approach answering some of those questions, whether that's a high level question or whether that's a specific detail thing, right? And I encourage you to kind of go from top down, address the broad stuff first, and then start to address the more detailed line item things later in the process, because as you address those broad things, lots of stuff is going to shift. Sometimes major plot structures will move around. And so you don't want to be spending your time on the detail things when you might lose that scene in moving a different plot element around anyways. So hopefully that helps. And yeah. So do you all who are our viewers today have any questions for us? Or I guess not us, it's just me here today. So feel free to drop them in chat if you do. I'm trying to check in with Erin and see if she's having any luck, but it does not seem like she is. It is hard to vamp when one is by oneself. It's a lot easier to do this when you have someone else to bounce off of, is what I will say. Let's see, answer those questions. See if there's anything else in here that didn't get addressed. Okay. Well, I'm sorry this isn't the most complete stream we could have done here. Going to give a little bit more time to see if anyone does have any questions for me. If y'all are doing nano, if you're stuck on a particular issue, if you have any questions about the industry or where the genre is at, or I don't know, anything y'all want to chat about or talk about, I'm here for a little bit longer. If there aren't any questions, then I'll probably end the stream a little early. With apologies that we didn't have the full complement today. I know there's a little bit of a time delay between my stream and what you guys are seeing, so I'm trying to give a little space for y'all to get any questions in there, but it seems like perhaps we don't have any questions this week. Hopefully everyone is enjoying their preparations for the holidays, and that everyone's travel is easy over the next few days if you're going somewhere. And if not, okay. Well, it does not look like that the folks who are here have questions that I can answer at this time. So I'm going to end the stream a little early. I do want to say thank you so much to those of you who are here for coming. I really appreciate it. And we are here every third Thursday of the month to answer questions for y'all. And I hope to see you in December. All right. Take care, everybody. Have a good night.